You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to dissect the midterm election with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have Salt Lake City Councilman Charlie Luke and State Auditor John Dougal. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Wow, Tuesday night. Could you believe the turnout we saw on those elections?
Yes.
You could?
Big turnout,
Absolutely. Long lines.
Okay, so let's talk about what drove the turnout.
Okay.
What was it?
Well, I think there were a lot of people that really wanted to make a statement about not only Donald Trump, but about politics locally. I think the propositions that were on the ballot motivated a lot of people to turn out and vote. And so I thought the turnout was going to be really good, and I think we saw that in Salt Lake County in particular.
We wondered going into it what type of an effect Mitt Romney would have on the election. Looking back at it now, did he have an effect?
I think he had a slight effect, but it wasn't a big effect. There was not a Mitt Romney wave, if you will. I think Charlie's right. The propositions, the questions that were on there, some of the national and local issues played in.
Let's delve into some of those propositions. One being Proposition 2. It was the most heated proposition throughout the process on the campaign.
It was burning.
Yeah, you could say
what
that.
What are you smoking?
Oh, stop now. But let's talk about this, because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of the opponents coming out strongly against this, is this vote a referendum against the church?
No.
No.
Why?
Because it was a referendum for medical marijuana. I think that, the church came out and opposed it. They tried to put together, with legislative leadership, this compromise that was supposed to fix everything. But I think that the public really believed that it was time that medical marijuana be legal in Utah. And I think that, in spite of the church, you had supporters coming out to do that. The church did definitely have a role in decreasing the excitement for it. I think before the church came out opposed, they were, in the mid 70s is what it was polling.
Yeah, I would say low 70s
before, low to
and then
mid 70s.
It started falling from there.
Then it immediately fell after that. I think, ending up at 53, 54%, where it's going to be, was to be expected. But no, I think that it's not a referendum on the church. I think people really did want medical marijuana.
That's what I was going to say. It still passed, and some church members said, I'm still voting for this regardless of what my leaders are saying to me.
I think you've got issues, folks that, family that's had cancer or other issues, folks are concerned about opioid addictions, and so all that rolled into play. If you look back at history, though, the church opposed repealing prohibition, and yet Utah was the state that voted to eliminate prohibition.
So there's a history of members kind of going against what their leaders are telling them.
At times.
Let's look into, here's something I was really fascinated by. Question 1, do you want to raise the gas tax to fund education? It went down in flames. Proposition 3, raising the sales tax to cover Medicaid expansion. I thought those two would have been a lot closer together, tied together, than what we ended up seeing.
Well, I agree with you. I was a little surprised at the numbers on question 1. I did think it was going to go down, though. But one of the key things that I don't think most Utahns understand is they just sent a very interesting message to the legislature. Historically, education funding has been the top priority of the legislature, and now the message is Medicaid funding. Medical entitlements is the top priority. When you look across the nation, state after state is being swamped by the cost of Medicaid, and education is becoming a second priority in those states. And I think that's the message Utah legislature got as well.
Why did we see that?
Well, I think that the opponents of Prop 1 did a really good job creating a lot of misinformation. I think when the legislature came back and said, look,
relatively speaking, though, it was pretty quiet.
Well, it was pretty quiet, but there was enough confusion about, you don't need to fund this, we're going to take care of it anyway. It's a non-binding issue. There was a lot of language that was used that I think people felt like, okay, we're going to trust the legislature that they are going to take care of it. We're going to trust the governor that he's going to take care of it. The reality is this was an opportunity where you could actually start putting money towards education, or where the public could do that, and they chose not to do it. They believed the legislature and the governor, and hopefully.
So to that point, did Utahns look at that and say, look, we've been investing enough in education over the years?
This will be the question. I don't know as it's clear exactly what the public said, whether they think it's enough and they don't want to do more, or they just didn't like that approach.
Yeah, I agree with John. I don't think you can read too much into this as far as funding goes. I think there was just a lot of confusion about that one issue.
But one of the interesting things is the legislature did pass a Medicaid expansion. and yet this proposition overrides that.
Well, they sort of passed Medicaid expansion. I mean, they passed
They
passed
it to the point where if it's approved by the federal government, it would have covered all of those that fall into the so-called donut hole.
Yeah. But I think that there was still enough concern that that hasn't happened yet, that it has not yet been approved, that the public felt that some sort of Medicaid expansion was important.
But one of the key concerns I have is when I talk to my colleagues, state auditors from across the nation, time and time again, the forecast of how many folks are going to enroll has been low, and the costs have been much higher than what was forecast.
On that note, there has already been a bill filed to repeal Proposition 3.
Yeah.
What are we going to see that? How are we going to see that play out? Because there are, some state legislators that are going to say the people that I represent do not approve of this, but the voters just sent a message saying this is what we want.
I think that any time you have a referendum, it can be, as an elected official, I can say this, that it can be somewhat not dangerous, but it doesn't always go the way it's difficult. It doesn't go the way that that elected officials necessarily want to see. And I think a perfect example of this is what happened in Holiday. With the Holiday referendum essentially ending the development opportunity at the Cottonwood Mall site. Went against what the elected officials wanted to see. The people put it on the ballot, and they overrode the elected officials. The public did the same thing with Medicaid expansion. If the legislature truly does repeal this initiative, it is going to be problematic, and it is going to really create a lot of problems with public faith.
Do you agree with that?
Not really, and I'd say usually I would agree, but this year is different. If the legislature is going to come in with this grand compromise on Prop 2 and override what passed in Prop 2, why not Prop 3, Prop 4, and other things like that?
And I don't think that this compromise, now that Prop 2 is passed, is going to be palatable for a lot of folks. In the 53%, 54% that voted for this.
Which is probably why they got ahead of it and said, look, pass or fail,
we're going to do this.
This is the plan we're going to take.
Sure, but it's still not going to be, when you have elected officials override the public, it doesn't go well.
Okay, we will see how that plays out. But I want to get into what we saw from turnout as well, especially in Salt Lake County. A big night for Democrats. In fact, Republicans, a really tough night. We saw huge wins for incumbent Salt Lake County clerk, the district attorney, the sheriff, and even some Republican incumbents losing.
Yeah.
What was that dynamic all about?
Democrats had a lot to turn out for. The seats that Democrats won in the legislature, and it wasn't just in Salt Lake County. I mean, you had Luana Shurtleff, who is back in Weber County, was reelected. You have the Shiazawa's seat that was then filled by Dr. Zender, or Zender, and he was good, but it really is a much more moderate to Democratic seat than we've seen in the past.
I think there's a couple other things. So, I think the Democrats, to get to their credit, they went out there, they did the blocking, the tackling, they hit the doors.
Especially when you look at House District 32, where Suzanne Harrison is taking over in Sandy.
I mean, I talked to some folks that said her campaign knocked on their door 6 times. I mean, that's a lot. And
the thing is, it's not just the candidates who won that did that. Even Democrats who lost, almost all of the candidates that the Democratic Party put up this year worked their tails off, and it is to their credit that happened. There are, whether the seats, a more moderate-leaning seat, whether you have, people who have been incumbents in the past, it doesn't matter when you work as hard as they did.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't always mean that you're going to get elected, but if there is something that needs to tip, that
Okay, about 15 seconds left. What message does that send to Republicans, though? Even though it was a modest gain in the state legislature.
They ebb and flow, back and forth, but I think the message to Republicans is don't take anything for granted.
All right. Gentlemen, we'll have to end it on that note. Appreciate your insight. Thanks for
Absolutely.
being here. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.